Welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Cook, and I am the Director of Operations and Services with the Canadian Centre for Safer Communities, which many of you know is formerly known as the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention. So, on behalf of CCFSC, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar entitled Game Changers Community Safety Through Sports. So, this event is part of our Future of Safe Communities speaker series. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Kitchener, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. And I'd also like to encourage everyone to post in the chat the traditional territory from which they are joining, so we can recognize Indigenous land from coast to coast. So I acknowledge the land as a small act of reconciliation to honor the land and Indigenous history and heritage. I also want to reiterate that when we talk about community safety and other related topics, as of course we'll be discussing today, it's really crucial to recognize that a number of these issues do disproportionately impact Indigenous communities in this country, and that a lot of these challenges can be explained in part by intergenerational trauma and negative life experiences that are the legacy left behind by residential schools and colonization. And so we will continue to consider these systemic barriers and inequities when conducting work related to community safety and well-being in communities. So before we get started with the session, I just want to give some background information on the Canadian Centre for Safer Communities for those of you who may not be familiar with our organization. So the Canadian Centre for Safer Communities, also known as CCFSC, and as I mentioned, formerly the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention, brings together urban, rural, and Indigenous communities across Canada to foster community safety and well-being through training, research, and knowledge exchange. We are a membership-based, not-for-profit organization, and we represent over 100 communities and about half of the national population. So our work is guided by a broader concept of community safety and well-being that includes thorough local assessments and planning processes, a variety of preventative measures, multi-sectoral dialogues, and public engagement. Our work is rooted in the understanding that communities are best positioned to work with local agencies and partners to identify specific service needs and address the root causes of violence, victimization, and of course, sense of safety. So CCFSC serves as a community of practice for municipal representatives, elected officials, community safety coordinators, frontline practitioners, and other professionals involved in the development, implementation, and evaluation of community-based strategies to improve safety and well-being at the local level. So a bit of background about the session today. So in alignment with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which recognizes sports as a catalyst for peace, tolerance, and respect, this event focuses on the contributions sports make to community empowerment, individual development, especially for young people, and overall well-being. And over the past several months, in our own work related to crime prevention and community safety, we've come across several organizations, programs, and documents that discuss the roles of sports in community safety and violence prevention. And because of this increasing focus and research area, we thought it would be interesting to facilitate a bit of a deeper dive into the role of sports in community safety and well-being, and to hear from researchers and practitioners in this space. So sports are often defined as a gateway into a better life, particularly for those facing poverty and living in disadvantaged areas. And this transformative role of sports is marked by the belief that it can instill confidence at the individual level while fostering strong community connections. So by offering opportunities for social engagement, diverse experiences, and life skill development, sports lead to positive impacts such as teamwork, achievement, overcoming challenges, and the sense of victory. And so because of this, sports, alongside other activities like education, mentoring, and volunteering, hold significant potential in shaping positive social development among children and youth. And so, recognizing this, community safety strategies have sought to leverage the popularity and benefits of sports to foster positive youth development and address risk factors associated with criminalization. So, sports based crime prevention and community safety programs manifest in various forms. Some focus on facilitating youth participation in sports and acquiring related skills, while others integrate complementary interventions using sports as a hook to engage and retain youth in broader initiatives. And so the role of sports as a tool for peace is actually emphasized in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which highlights sports' contributions to community empowerment, particularly for women and young people, as well as its impact on health, education, and social inclusion. The United Nations Action Plan on Sport for Development and Peace further identifies sports as a crucial enabler of sustainable development, providing a framework for governments, civil society, and the private sector to align sports with the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So many organizations have shifted their focus in response to increasing knowledge about the role of sports in community safety. So, for example, UNODC has spearheaded youth crime prevention through sports initiatives encompassing pilot programs, tools, and guidance. Organizations on the front line are also actively delivering sports-based programs to equity-deserving young people. And there's also an increasing emphasis on preventing specific forms of violence. So, for example, radicalization to violence and violent extremism. So, with that in mind, we are now excited to move on to our panel on community safety through sports. So the panel of speakers we have will discuss how sports can serve as a tool for building crucial life skills, steering individuals away from potential violence, crime, and substance use. And we're hoping that today you as participants will learn about sports-based prevention programs in Canada and beyond, and gain insights into the various ways sports can enhance safety, education, health, and social inclusion. And just a quick disclaimer, so to ensure that all of our panelists have sufficient time for their presentation, we're going to hold the questions until the end where we have specific time set aside for Q&A. That being said, we will monitor the chat during the panel presentation, so please feel free to post questions as they arise, and then we'll address them during the Q&A time. And you're also more than welcome to react or comment in the chat throughout the presentations. So without further ado, we are very excited to introduce our speakers for today. So first you will hear from Georgia Dimitropoulou, who is a crime prevention and criminal justice officer at UNODC. Then Umair Asif, a PhD candidate at the University of Quebec in Montreal, will present, and followed by Martin Bisp, the chief executive of Empire Fighting Chance. So thank you, first of all, to all the panelists for being here today and for your willingness to share your knowledge and insights on this topic. We very much appreciate it. So I'm going to stop sharing now. So our first speaker is Georgia Dimitropoulou. So Georgia is a crime prevention and criminal justice officer at UNODC office in Vienna and has done so since 2019. In her current work, she's working at UNODC headquarters in Vienna in the crime prevention and criminal justice section on crime prevention with a focus on prevention of youth violence and crime. And in this context, she is leading the UNODC Global Initiative on Youth Crime Prevention through Sport that promotes the use of sport as a tool for youth violence, crime, and drug use prevention, and supports the integration of sport in crime prevention strategies. So Georgia, over to you. Oh, Georgia, sorry, you're on mute. You just have to.
So thank you very much for the introductions and the opening remarks that set very well the scene and the context of the discussion today. As already mentioned, I work for UNODC. Our presentation is structured a little bit on global developments in this area and UNODC work. And then I will focus on one of the flagship programs that we have, which is sport-based life skills training program called Line Up Live Up, and so also some updates from more recent work of UNODC in this area. So, as I said, I mean, the sports for development and peace sector has been growing more the last years, including initiatives that are focusing on crime prevention or public safety. The UNODC work in this area aims to basically promote more effective and evidence-based use of sports programming in this context as part of holistic multi-sectoral responses to violence and crime prevention. So sports in this context is being used as a tool to reach out to young people in particular, including those that have been at a particular risk, and through tailored intervention and methodologies to address known risk and protective factors and help them build resilience to violence and crime. So UNODC work in this area based on the framework of sport for development and peace that you mentioned already, that acknowledge the contribution of sports in this context, but also the UN standards and norms of crime prevention that provide the overall policy guidance on effective prevention and the criminological research on what works in this area. So there is a growing body of research which suggests that sports can be used effectively in the context of diversion programs, for example, offering structural activities for young people. More importantly, in the context of social development approaches to violence and crime, providing lasting development mentoring, for example, but also for situational crime prevention, looking into how to create safe public space at the community level and promoting social cohesion and building social capital. More recent research also shows the added value of sports programming, the social integration of offenders, especially the juvenile ones. So indeed, the sports can be used then at primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of prevention with different target groups, focusing in particular to young people and achieve intended outcomes. So while there is a limited evidence on the causal link between the participation in sports programming and the prevention of crime, the evidence suggests that the sports can be used very effectively in this context. And they can be effectively preventing recidivism, promote social integration of young companions, as already mentioned, but importantly, to build the social, cognitive, and emotional skills and empower young population. In short, what we have learned from the research in this area is, despite this lack of causal link, sport programming can be very effective. However, it is very important to understand that the way that sport programs have been designed and delivered is very crucial and important in order to achieve these intended outcomes and results, which are maybe non-sports outcomes. And this is where UNODC works is focusing in supporting this type of programming. So what we know also from research, very briefly to summarize, that the program design and implementation process, the capacities of the trainers that they've been engaged, the way that the programs are tailored to specific target groups, and to the extent that they are being contextualized to the local realities and the implementation settings are very important in determining the impact of sports programs in this area. Also, it is very important, the duration and sustainability of sports interventions is research also shows that the positive outcome of sports might be diluted over time. So mentioned the duration and sustainability is very important as well. So one of the flagship programs that UNODC has been working on the last years is the so-called Learn Active Up program, which is a sports-based life skills training curriculum, which was developed as an evidence-informed tool through UNODC and a group of experts from the area of sports for development, but also crime prevention, criminal justice sector, which promotes a participatory approach and uses sports to transfer important knowledge, skills, and address normative beliefs and stereotypes linked to violence, including gender-based violence. It provides a curriculum of 10 interactive sessions that have been really focused on specific topics based on what works in the research, and targets young people 12 to 18 years old, boys and girls. In this context of lineup lab program, sports is being used as a platform, as an experimental base to deliver certain skills, as already mentioned, through the mediating factors that the program works on. All sessions include the sports components, followed by debriefing and self-reflection processes. And this approach is very important to transfer the knowledge, the learning, the skill development from the pro-sport practice to the real-life situation. And hence the role of sport and the trainers, the sports trainers as facilitators is very crucial and important. So a lot of focus on this work is on building the capacity of the facilitators, the trainers that are going to work with the young people to do sports programming. The program was developed back in 2017 and was tested and piloted with the support of UNODC to over 14 countries across the globe. This includes different regions as well, from Brazil and Colombia, Dominican Republic, to Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, but also MENA region or Africa countries. And the lineup of that practice was quite diverse, with the program activities to being tailored and contextualized in the local setting and context. So as a result, it was implemented in different settings as well. In certain countries, work through school-based programming, and others at the community level. And also in order to ensure sustainability of the program, it was always tapped in more comprehensive interventions and programming. So in certain countries, for example, was implemented as part of public safety strategies and community policing approaches, especially in the Latin America countries, while in other countries we work through the school-based programming or after-school activities focusing on at-risk youth, which was the primary focus of our activities. So the design of the program delivery was either focusing directly to specific young people or was implemented in areas and communities with a high that were highly impacted by violence and crime rates. The issue of gender and gender-based violence and how sports can contribute to this was also an important element of lineup of our programming. This is addressed also through the tailored sessions that included in the program curriculum, but also in the overall design and implementation by ensuring equal engagement of boys and girls, but also men and women facilitators, but also by promoting positive interaction between boys and girls participants and raising awareness of sports-based, of gender-based values in sports programming as well, and the risks related to including to sexual violence in sports. Another area where through lineup development we focused a lot and addresses the use of sports for the creation of safe spaces at a local level, especially in slum areas and communities that have been very much affected by crime rates. So that was an important element, especially in countries from the LAC region. What you see in the screen is a picture for a program that was developed with the lineup of our participants, the parents, local community members, and civil society, where they develop local interventions to take up public space and upgrade the space in order to be used by community members in different types of activities, including the delivery of lineup of our program. And it was just one of the examples that of this type of work. In addition to this work, we also look into specific guidance tools on preventing violence coming through sports. I'm not going to go into this. I know there is a focus intervention that follows my presentation, but I'm happy to discuss more later on. Going back to the program, for us it was very important to strengthen the monitoring, evaluation, and impact assessment in this area. We know all studies show that there is a need for more research and evidence-based programming when it comes to sports for crime prevention. So lineup revamp program is built on a very particular theory of change that looks in short, medium-term, long-term outcomes. And it comes with a very comprehensive monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework, which looks to process and impact assessment. So that was a key element of all interventions we did. So we summarize somehow the outcomes from the pilot interventions in a study that shows, for example, increased rates of participation of at-risk youth, what was a great achievement of the program, since this is one of the key challenges that crime prevention sector has in engaging this population, but also greater increase in life skills targeted through the program. The evaluation also saw that it's very important to, in order to increase the impact of this type of programming, focusing in life skills training, for example, like the lineup revamp, if it is part of more comprehensive and interventions, and also are more sustained. And building on this work that we did, we moved on by building broader partnerships with the sports sector to further promote the sports programming in the context of this more comprehensive intervention beyond the life skills training, but let's say unlock all potential of sports in this area. So recently, we team up with the International Olympic Committee and the sports sector in a new joint initiative, which we call SCORE, which is Sports Against Crime, in short. And as mentioned, it aims to look into the use of sports in this context in a more broader perspective, look into how sports sector can also contribute and be part of this type of multi-sectoral partnership for crime prevention, and also guide more work in this area through monitoring, evaluation, research, and capacity building for evidence-based programming. Very shortly, the objective of SCORE in this area and the priorities. I would just like to highlight that we aim to look specifically on secondary and tertiary prevention and the use of sports programming for social reintegration of youth that have been in conflict with the law. But also, our ambition is also, as said, to build capacity, particularly of the sports sector, and bring them in this type of interventions and programs. I'm sorry that there is no slides. For the last, so the next year, so building on the work we did with Elana Rivab, we will continue supporting the policy development and capacity building in this area through also new tools developed under the SCORE initiative and pilot interventions. We have Senegal and Mexico as two pilot countries where we're going to support design and implementation of more comprehensive interventions that build on sports. And focusing on at-risk youth. And part of this work, I would like to close with an upcoming policy guide in this area, which was developed together with the International Olympic Committee and with input from various experts from different countries, including from Public Safety Canada, and provides a more comprehensive theory of change on sports programming in the different levels of crime prevention. And it's going to be followed by a technical tool on the operationalization of this guide, looking specifically on the design, effective design and implementation of policy and programming in this area. This is for me. I'm happy to engage later in the discussion and answer more questions about the work we do as journalists.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Very much appreciate your presentation. And I think you highlighted a really important, multiple points, but something that really stuck with me is just that consideration that simply having a sport-based program isn't sufficient, and we need to be intentional in the way that they're delivered to ensure positive, meaningful outcomes. And I really appreciated that the examples that you shared as well. All right, so our next speaker then is Omer Asif. So Omer is a PhD candidate at the University of Quebec in Montreal with a master's degree in sport management. He delves into the intersection of sport and violent extremism prevention for his doctoral research. With a passion for social activism, Omer has actively engaged in the Sport for Development and Peace movement, youth development, and peace building since 2010. He is also board member of the UNESCO Task Force on Youth and Sport and is the founder of Kafka Welfare Organization Pakistan. Additionally, Umair's academic journey includes teaching experience at GC University Lahore, Pakistan for 2 years, and he currently maintains affiliations with UNESCO chairs on curriculum development and violent extremism and radicalization prevention in Montreal. So Umair, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting today. And you have talked about some important stuff already. So I will try to take it from here. Today, I will talk about sport for development and violent extremism prevention in Canada and internationally. I will cover the research on this theme and promising sports-based initiatives in Canada and internationally. So I have a definition of key terminologies for the people who are not well aware. Violent extremism specifically refers to the beliefs and actions of people who support or use violence to achieve ideological, religious, or political goals. You have talked about sport for development already. So the term violent extremism got prominence after 9/11 incident when Al-Qaeda attacked on US. And after that, people started thinking what's inside their minds, what they're thinking, why they are doing these things. Also, radicalization is the process when someone is engaged in violent extremism related activities. And there are two terminologies we use, countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism. Countering violent extremism is more when security forces are taking actions against extremist groups or they prevent violent extremism related activities. Preventing violent extremism is when we use sport or arts and other soft approaches to prevent violent extremism. My research is linked with preventing violent extremism and its primary prevention also. I link my research with three SDGs, SDG 3, 10, and 16. You also talked about sport for development, but I would like to mention some dates, especially the movement of sport for development and peace was started in the start of 2000. And after that, the program started developing on the theme. Also, the researchers started exploring the topic after that. Also, there was an agency of UN started in 2001, UNOSDP. As Georgie also mentioned, the topic of violent extremism prevention or crime prevention through sport is not old. And around 2015, the topic got more prominence and endorsement of UN and UNODC has been taking care of it after that. Georgie also mentioned, but I would like to repeat that in sport for development programs, we use some specific things. For example, the use of safe space is common in which external threats are avoided. Also, we use team-based approach to promote social interaction. And we also have social objectives for all activities we use during sport for development programs. Violent extremism is a global threat and its prevention is a top priority around the world and in Canada. In Canada, it's more like far-right extremism, Islamist extremism, eco-extremism, and anti-government extremism. And the issues in Canada are immigration and settlement, indigenous rights and reconciliation, and racial discrimination. So the majority programs in Canada which are using sport for crime prevention, violent extremism prevention, they are focusing on specifically on social inclusion and social integration of immigrants. Also, there are several programs working with indigenous communities on the reconciliation. The reasons behind violent extremism engagement of young people particularly could be mental illness, social isolation or exclusion, similarly financial issues. Researchers and practitioners also endorse that community resilience is the best solution to prevent violent extremism, and they embrace the role of sport to enhance community resilience among young people particularly. Many sports programs are working after 2000 on social development, but later they started working on crime prevention or violent extremism prevention. But from the point of view of research, they are not well explored. Research on the theme is limited. So there is a gap, and the mechanism of such programs is not well understood yet. The research on this theme, specifically on violent extremism prevention, was published first in 2014, and now it's growing, but still it's limited. So we need more research to understand this topic well. There are many UN initiatives Georgia already mentioned in her slides. From the research point of view, so there are different keywords around this theme. For example, violent extremism prevention and crime prevention, violence prevention, peace building. Some researchers explore these themes together. Of course, they overlap somehow, but in my research, I am particularly focusing on violent extremism prevention. The topic of sport and peace is existing more after 2000 when the movement was established. But in one of our recent study, which is not published yet, we explored the existence of such programs before 2000, and there are some programs which were working before 2000, especially in United States, to prevent violence. There is a research, particularly in UK, which is exploring crime prevention through sports in prisons. And the studies I found on this theme are empirical studies, which are using mixed methods. Also, there are literature reviews. In all the research on violent extremism and sports, the most popular sport used is football, which is also the most popular sport in the world. So there are reviews available in the field, such as desk review on sport and violent extremism prevention by UNODC, and there is one which explored combined violence, crime, and radicalization and violent extremism by SPAY. It's organized by ICSSPE. It's an organization based in Europe, which is working on violent extremism prevention with young people. The first article on the theme is this one. They explore resilience development towards violent extremism among young people in a sport-based program that was held in Australia, and they were integrating immigrant Muslims. Also, there is another article which combined de-radicalization and crime prevention. It's a literature review. In the research on this theme, so I am particularly focusing on violent extremism prevention, as I mentioned before, and there are only 12 articles, around 12 articles are available on this theme by now, and they are published in diverse journals such as Social Inclusion, Psychology of Sports, Journal for De-Radicalization, Journal for Peace Psychology. And these researchers are exploring populations. In majority of these empirical studies, they are working with adults or young people, youth. And the approaches they are using in those programs in that research area are resilience building, PVE, CVE, de-radicalization, crime diversion. They are using peace education curriculum also and sport for social change, sport for peace. So they are using these approaches in those programs and in the research to understand the issue of sport and social development related with crime. In Canada, we did a study this year, which is not published yet, but we found out while exploring sport and indigenous communities globally that majority research is from Canada. Even in Australia, it's limited research, but majority articles are from Canada, and the funding is also huge. But in Canada, there are several programs working with communities, especially with immigrants, on the social integration and social inclusion. But the research on this theme is limited, which needs to be more developed in coming years. So this is one of the book chapter discussing sport and crime prevention. And there are only few articles available on this theme. There are two research chairs in Montreal, UNESCO Chair on Curriculum Development, under which we are exploring sport for development and peace theme. And there is another research chair on violent extremism and radicalization prevention, which is exploring violent extremism prevention theme specifically. Now I will talk about sport for development and peace programs dealing with social integration and violent extremism prevention. Right to Play is one of the prominent program in the movement of sport for development, and it's based in Toronto, Canada. They are working all over the world, and they're covering several themes such as education, health, resilience building, reconciliation, empowerment. So it's one of the important program, and in Canada, they are also working with indigenous community on reconciliation. Similarly, Football for Peace is another important program in the moment, which is based at Brighton University in UK. They are working all over the world on several themes, particularly peace building. I worked with them in Korea also. They were working on the reconciliation of North Korean children. There are some international programs such as a task force by UNESCO, and there was a Young Leaders program by UNOCTP. Right now, UNOCT has a program which is called Global Sports Program. They are uniting and advocating all young people working around this theme of sport and crime prevention. Peace and Sport is another important program based in Europe, and Peace Players International, Cricket for Change. There are some international programs working all over the world on sport for development, and particularly which is linked to social integration and social inclusion. In Canada, uh, particularly in Montreal, YMCA is not a local program, it's an international movement. But in Montreal, they have some programs in which they are engaging children and teenagers through youth zones where they engage them in positive activities. Those young people are sometimes from the street, sometimes from immigration background. and they are engaged on daily basis in the evenings through different positive activities, and sport is one of the activity they are using. They also have a program for autistic people in which they are engaging autistic people through sports and focusing on their social integration. There are several cricket clubs in Montreal, in Quebec and Canada, which are engaging particularly South Asians and working on their social integration and social inclusion. Special Olympic is another international program which is also working in Canada, and they work particularly with children having autism spectrum disorder. So these were several programs I mentioned. They are working in Canada and around the world and using the power of sport to promote peace and to prevent crime and violent extremism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amir. I think it's interesting the lack of that research examining the relationship between sport participation and that PCV prevention and intervention. I think it really speaks to the need for further exploration in the area, and especially considering all the programs you listed and the emerging impacts they're having on young people. I think it highlights that we need more evaluation programs that can really emphasize the impact that these programs can have. So thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate it. All right, so our third panelist is Martin Bisp. So Martin is the Chief Executive of Empire Fighting Chance, a program that uses a combination of non-contact boxing and intensive personal support to challenge and inspire young people aged 8 to 25 to realize their unique potential. And before co-founding Empire Fighting Chance, he voluntarily managed and coached the Empire Amateur Boxing Club and worked as a private sector business analyst for over 20 years. So Martin, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. I'll try and share my screen now. Right, hopefully you can all see that. I was going to talk today really about kind of where we've come from, who we are, and what we do. So first thing I'm going to start talking about is where we come from. Whilst I'm absolutely confident everybody on this call is familiar with the English geography, Bristol is the home of Empire Fighting Chance, and it's based in the southwest corner of the country. It's the largest city in that quadrant. It's also apparently the wealthiest place outside of London in the southeast in the UK. As you can see from the picture, it's also a beautiful city, our world famous suspension bridge. And we have annually a balloon fiesta where hundreds of thousands of people come from all over the globe to take part for sort of 3 or 4 days. However, this is also Bristol. Bristol is a city of extremes. Alongside huge wealth sits massive deprivation and poverty. We, as the Empire, initially Empire Amateur Boxing Club and then the Empire Fighting Chance, came from an area of Bristol called St Paul's. St Paul's is an inner city area, mainly of Afro-Caribbean and white working class British people, has areas of social issues. It's been built on civil unrest. There's been multiple riots. It's also home to one of the city's 2 most violent gangs, and it's an area blighted by prostitution, violence, drugs. And this is Stapleton Road. So 8 years ago, we got our building was sold and we were moved from St Paul's to an area of Bristol called Easton, which we sit on sort of gang neutral territory. And Easton is the other side of a motorway, and is the second area that's massively affected by violence and gangs and drugs. So this road here is called Stapleton Road. This is also Stapleton Road. So a newspaper headline helpfully said that it was a lawless hellhole where murder, rape, shootings, drug pushing, prostitution, knife-ins, and violent robbery are commonplace. So we are basically between areas that are currently involved in a retaliatory cycle of violence, one of which has been dubbed Britain's most dangerous street, one of which has been built on civil unrest and violence. Now, we, as initially the Empire Amateur Boxing Club, and I'll explain a bit more in a moment, was the first place in the city that black and white used to mix. So Bristol, for those that don't know, was hugely racially fractured, probably until the 90s. And the Empire Boxing Club and the Empire Sports Club was based in St Paul's, which was largely a no-go area. And it was the only place in the city where everybody used to mix. Nobody cared where you came from. Once you were in there, it was a safe space where everybody got on. And I don't know if you can see the hand waving, but that's Jimmy there and Jimmy there. So Jimmy started boxing for the Amateur Club in 1970. He still works now for the charity, so he's been involved for 50 plus years. We are also, and this is not a great boast as it sounds, we're Bristol's most successful sport. So we've produced 4 world champions, British champions, Commonwealth champions, European champions. We're the only thing in the city that constantly produces world-class athletes. We have a charity called Empire Fighting Chance that was born at the Empire Amateur Boxing Club. And I'll talk a little bit about how we started. So I was, as you mentioned, I've run the Amateur Boxing Club since 2000. And I was a business analyst for 25 plus years. In 2006, it was a Friday night. Nobody ever wants to coach in the gym on a Friday night. I looked out the window and I saw 2 young men that we knew dealing drugs in the local park. So my co-founder, Jamie Sanaga, and I, for reasons that I don't think we knew at the time, but in hindsight, we were fed up with picking needles up before we trained. We were fed up with prostitutes accosting people using the gym. We were fed up with acts in the doorway. We went over and said, look, this has to stop. We had a whole conversation about how nobody cared about them. There was nothing to do. There was nowhere to go. And we were like, well, we care. We care. Come back in the gym. And we, in the nicest way, dragged them back into the gym, did a session with them. And we said, look, the gym's yours. You want to come back Monday? Come back Monday. So Monday evening, James rang me and he said, these 2 kids have come back and they've got some friends. And there was 2 more, then there was 2 more, and then there was 2 more. And basically within 6 weeks, we had 50 young people coming 5 days a week. We had no idea what to do. We were flipping a coin for day 3 and we were doing 2 days each. And honestly, that was it. We were a little boxing club, just trying to do our little bit for an immediate community that had supported us for all that time. That went on for 3 months. A school rang up and said, you've been working with Denzel, his behaviour's improved. Would you consider working with Jamal? We said, yeah, we would, but we were going to charge you. And what we did is we charged the school, and I don't know if anybody has anything about professional boxing, but bar 1%. No boxer makes any money at all. Most of the time, actually, it costs them to be a professional boxer. So we had a young man who wanted to box professionally, and we said, okay, you can come and work for us. You can train, you can do some personal training on the side, and hopefully make a living. And that was our ambition. That went on for months, no plan, just trying to help a few kids. And then 2 things happened, which actually, in hindsight, changed my life, although I didn't know it at the time. One was a young man sent to us who was going to be thrown out of school. Could not understand it. He was polite. He would tidy the circuits away at the end. He'd want to hang around and chat. And we sat him down and said, listen, this is serious. What's going on? And he just said, I don't understand maths. So rather than hold my hand up and go, oh, I don't know the answer, I kick off, I shout, I swear, I get removed from the class. I don't get embarrassed. And Jamie and I decided that we were going to try and help him. So we did some really basic numeracy, like if you've boxed 3 rounds and each round's 2 minutes, how many minutes have you boxed, to get his confidence? And within 2 weeks of that incident, or we always say 2 weeks, a young man was sent to us that had obvious mental health issues. And I rang the school and I went, listen, he's not naughty, he's just not well. And in their defense, it was 2006. The conversation was, we don't know what to do with him. We haven't got any resource. We just want him off site. So I thought, okay, I'll book him an appointment with the Adolescent Mental Health Service. When I rang up, the conversation was, is he at crisis point? No. Has he tried to kill himself? No. Oh, we can't see him. Oh, but if we could see him, it'd be 12 months. Now, I believe that we're talking about 2 to 3 years now in the current system. So we found someone that was at their crisis point that the system wouldn't help. And Jamie and I were so appalled, we decided that we wanted to tackle the underlying problem. We didn't really care about the symptom. We wanted to try and sort of see if we can make a lasting change. So we started to create programs with sort of psychologists and therapeutically minded, with the idea being is that we would just add a little bit back to Bristol. That went on for 6 years. Again, not much of a plan. I wasn't being paid, but we wanted to add something back to Bristol. And in 2012, we met somebody who ran a charity, an international charity, actually went, look, you do what we do, kind of, and we're earning millions of pounds a year. You should be a charity. Truthfully, I was so anti it, it was unbelievable. I came from the corporate world. I had a vision of charity life that didn't suit me at all. But in the end, we decided to become a charity. In 2013, we became a charity. So hopefully what I start talking about now gives you some context how we got there. It was driven entirely by need, entirely by circumstance, and at no point did we want to do anything other than help young people in our community. What do? We run, I'm going to say, 4 main programs. We've got Box Champions, Box Therapy, Box Careers, and Box Juniors. So the first one is Box Champions. It's a psychologically informed program. We work with a psychologist who's retained 3 days a week. If anybody knows anything about English football, he's also the psychologist for Wrexham Football Club. If you know anything about Hollywood, Wrexham Football Club is owned by Ryan Reynolds. So our psychologist spends 2 days a week with Ryan Reynolds and co, and then 3 days a week with us. And our point was, we deal with young people that have often been through multiple interventions where they're kind of told what to do or how to feel, or interventions that aren't in the community or not that accessible. And we decided that we wanted to do something where actually the psychology was implicit. So rather than try and make them and force them to having conversations, we could have a conversation using actually boxing analogies, because our stuff, as you mentioned, is all non-contact. So it's the training, it's hitting the bags, it's hitting the pads. And it even might, and the idea being is to create self-agency. And that conversation might be really simple about moods or normalizing feelings. But what we're trying to do is, we're not trying to fix young people. That's important to us. What we're trying to do is normalize how they feel and allow them to move forward when they start to. So that program runs for 20 weeks. Box therapy is a similar principle. I was speaking to a kid in reception about 6 years ago who would not access therapy at all. When I asked why, we had well, I don't want to go to a posh part of Bristol. I don't want to talk to somebody who's 40 years old. I mean, that doesn't understand what I'm talking about. And you know what? Sitting in a room and talking to somebody is really intimidating. And I'm like, well, actually, yeah, I get all those things. So we decided we were going to create box therapy. So we've got qualified therapists who are credible and look the part in the gym that deliver the therapeutic stuff through the boxing training. We've removed embarrassment, we've removed stigma, we've increased retention rates. We're finding young people come to us and stay in. And even importantly, in the environment, they're not called therapists, they're called coaches. So a young person, anybody would think they would be having a one-to-one boxing session. So we're able to access young people that traditionally, and cultures like the Afro-Caribbean and the Somali cultures that are traditionally not, the hyper-masculine stuff, and they won't access potential mental health services in the UK. They will access mental health services through us because it's done in an environment where they feel safe. Box careers, and I think, both my fellow panelists have mentioned this, but if we can't find something for them to do, 16, 17, 18, doesn't matter what we do, they end up getting back in the position they were in a few months. So the idea is that we still use the boxing, but we've got a career service and young people that come through. And this can be extreme. So we're working with some gang violence cycles at the moment, and we're getting young people from the front line. We're providing them with psychological support, and then we're getting them access to employment, with the idea being is that they start moving away from the lifestyle of selling drugs, which most of the time is just to pay the bills. They're not buying Porsches in bouncing like trainers. They're literally paying their bills. We're moving them away from that, and we're moving into employment where they can create wealth and move away from that lifestyle. And in Box Juniors, to be honest, that's a drop in and drop out. So it's, one, it's for the community, and two, it's a way that we can work with young people and then move them into something with their peers. Because if we hang on to them for too long, I think we're harming them, and we might spot somebody from the community in the session that we can then move into intensive programs. So that's what we do. Our impact, well, we worked with about 5,000 young people last year. These are some of the stats. We collect stats in multiple different ways. As an analyst, I find some of the, if I'm truthful, the charitable sector stuff a little bit flaky for my liking. So I do struggle with some of the claims. We're working with a couple of universities in the UK to work out how we can do things differently. But those are some of our, and like that. And this is a bit that interests me as well, because when you do good work and as you become more successful, people want you to grow. And there's this incessant thing that growth needs to be about earning more money, having more staff, creating more centres. And I actually think that's wrong. I think that charities and organisations should be judged on their impact. If you're not doing the job, then your size is kind of almost an irrelevance. And actually, I also believe that community has the answer. So it feels to me a little bit foolhardy and at best arrogant that I think I can walk into a different community in a different part of the UK and go, I can solve your problem. We're Empire. Let me have a boxing gym and it'll be done in 20 minutes. It's just not true. So what we did is design training programs with train and support organisations across the country. So this map's slightly out of date, but to be honest, I haven't got the skills to update it and the designer was busy. But we've got about 35 to 40 partners who are delivering our programs. They range from boxing clubs to youth justices to sports clubs to youth-led organisations. And what we're finding, for example, the youth justice is somewhere where a young person would go and have a choice of going on a course like we run, or they would go to prison. and the reoffending rate with the 2 year system are 2.4 times less likely to reoffend if they go through our program than other programs, for example. It's not a massive cohort number, but they're showing that the kids aren't reoffending. And those partners also work with nearly 7,000 young people. So between us, we're probably working with 13-ish thousand young people. And what I like is that these programs are sustainable. So these clubs are working, organizations are working with kids who are involved in violence. They're working with kids who are being excluded from school, which, as we know, is a precursor for them to get involved in other stuff. And they're keeping them in school. They're reducing violence and they're becoming sustainable. So actually what we're starting to build is a legacy where organizations and communities across the country are using our methodology and keeping kids in school. This really is just a bit of our journey. I won't bore you with this, but when we started off, we couldn't get any money at all. Last year, we had a dinner at the Savoy Hotel in central London, where they raised nearly £1 million for us in a single night. And then we had a royal visit, and I keep this in for Jan Fox from Reach because she loved Prince Harry, so I've kept the picture in case she joined the call. But we had a royal visit. So just to summarise, I kind of agree with everybody. I think sport's uniquely placed to engage people. It's often credible, legitimate. It's at the heart of communities. It's been trusted. Clubs have been there for years. Actually, I think if we upskilled sport-based organisations, we could make a massive difference. And that's me done. Apologies if I've overrun.
First of all, I just want to extend a huge thank you to all of our panelists again for being here today and for your presentations and sharing such interesting knowledge and insights into the role that sports can play in the prevention of violence and crime and community safety. We very much appreciate it. And so just a final kind of note, we will be providing a link to the recording of this session. As you know, it's been recording. So once it's ready to go, we will send that out in an email. And we will communicate. I assume the panelists are okay sharing their contact information, so that will probably be included in there as well. So we'll follow up with everyone in the coming days once we have all of that. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about the presentation today or just the organization in general, feel free to reach out to us at the Canadian Centre for Safer Communities. I'm just going to plop the email in the chat real quick. So this is our administrative email. So feel free to reach us that way. And other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Have a great rest of your day. And we hope to see you at future knowledge exchange events like this one.
Thank you very much.